if you ever want to know just how sterilized and watered down movies are these days, just watch Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman back to back, in that order. What's funny is that when Bryan Singer was fired as director of Bohemian Rhapsody for being a pedophile, he was replaced by Dexter Fletcher, the man who would go on to direct Rocketman. Funny how that works out. Now, before I compare these movies, I want to say that I do not hate Bohemian Rhapsody. As far as entertainment goes, it's actually really good. That being said, holy shit, was it overhyped and overrated. I would love to know what drugs the Academy was on when they nominated it for 4 awards. Seriously, the only Oscar this movie actually deserved was Best Lead Actor for Rami Malek. Best Sound Editing should have gone to A Quiet Place, Best Sound Mixing should have gone to Roma, and Best Editing should have gone to either BlacKkKlansman or The Favorite. Seriously, Bohemian Rhapsody winning Best Editing is like a Michael Bay movie winning Best Director. For the most part, the editing isn't awful, just kind of subpar, but the editing during the Live Aid concert is just terrible. I mean, Rocketman's editing isn't phenomenal, but at least it is actually good. Okay, I'm getting a little off track, so I'm just going to start the actual comparison. One thing I can praise in both of these films is the lead actors. Both Rami Malek and Taron Egerton clearly did a lot of research and put in a lot of work, and they brought their respective musicians to life with great success. Now, as most people already know, Rami Malek did not do his own singing. The editor dubbed over his lip syncing with audio from the real Freddie Mercury. Mama, you killed a man. This does seem like the easy way, because it is, but it's also the smart way, because pretty much no one can sing like Freddie Mercury. No, literally, the man had forks or teeth in his mouth, and that changed the way he sounded. At this time, I'm going to defer to a dialect coach in a Wired video because he knows more about this than I do.
First of all, I don't think I've ever talked in one of these videos about prosthetics. But, of course, prosthetics are incredibly common, especially when actors are playing real people.
I've got to make an impression, darling.
You look like an angry lizard.
You can change the look and shape of the face with prosthetics, and, of course, that's going to affect the way the actor speaks.
Well done, Columbo.
In this case, it's hard to imagine playing Freddie Mercury without those teeth.
Yes, of course.
Of course, it takes time to get used to something like having prosthetics in your mouth. Something interesting about the way he does adapt to this, there's that very immobile upper lip. You can see that in Mercury here.
I didn't really think we were going to last that long. I mean, you never think about it.
And here's Malek.
I'm going to be what I was born to be, a performer.
Link to the full video in the description. Taron Egerton actually did his own singing, and he did a great job of sounding like the real Elton John, both when talking and when singing.
If I was a sculptor, but then again, no, or a man who makes potions and travel show.
It probably helps that Sir Elton is still alive and undoubtedly helped him. Now, both of these performances are very impressive, and both actors clearly cared about their characters a lot. I think Malek embodied Freddie a little bit better than Egerton embodied Elton, but Egerton actually did his own singing, so I'm going to call this one a tie. Now, obviously, both of these movies took some liberties with history, and one of the biggest differences between them is how they did it, how they used creative license, what they changed, how and why they changed it, and how the changes affect the overall movies. Most of the changes made to Bohemian Rhapsody seem to have been made for no reason, and really only served to make it more generic. Early on in the film, the band sells their touring van to get the money for their debut album.
That's 3 months' wages.
And a perfectly good van.
Don't be so dramatic, darling. You're recording an album tonight. Let's go!
In reality, they just got insanely lucky when a couple guys with a music studio let them record during the studio's downtime in exchange for managerial rights. Now, in my opinion, that would have been fine to keep in the movie. But because this is a music biopic, it has to be an underdog story, because that's how they all are. This change serves basically no purpose besides just making the film more cliched. In the movie, the band clashes with a record executive named Ray Foster, played by Mike Myers. He's a greedy pig who wants Queen's music to be more commercial so that he can make more money. Problem is, Ray Foster is neither a real person nor a complex character. He's a cardboard cutout masquerading as a character who serves 2 purposes, personifying the band's obstacles and adding another cliché to the movie. Now, the movie would also have you believe that We Will Rock You was written in the 1980s. In reality, the song was recorded and released in 1977, and by the 80s, it was one of the most popular songs. I mean, at least they got the reason for the song's existence right, so that's something.
The crowd were singing our songs back to us. I mean, it was deafening, but it was wonderful. They're becoming a part of our show. I want to encourage that, so I've got an idea to involve them a little bit more. Let's start with this. Stamp to this beat.
Genius.
Thank you, John. Come on. Good. Now, I want you to clap on the third beat.
John Deacon was not the band's original bassist. He was their fourth. However, this is a minor change and was honestly probably made to prevent the runtime from becoming bloated. Freddie Mercury did not know he was HIV positive before the Live Aid concert. In the movie, Freddie tells the band he has AIDS during the rehearsals for Live Aid.
I've got it.
Got what?
AIDS. I wanted you to hear it from me.
This isn't even close to what actually happened, and all it does is give the film the big emotional climax that all musical biopics are seemingly required to have. In reality, Freddie was diagnosed with AIDS almost 2 years after Live Aid. He also kept it a secret, and the rest of the band didn't find out until shortly before he died. In the movie, Freddie is conveniently at a Smile concert when their lead singer quits. This is a huge plot convenience, and honestly defies suspension of disbelief, because it makes it seem like the band coming together was fate or some such bullshit. Like, Freddie just so happened to attend a concert on the exact same night the band's lead singer quit. Right. As far as pointless changes that make the movie more generic go, probably the biggest offender is the fact that Queen never split up in real life. This change does not improve the film at all, and its only purpose is so that the movie can have one of those big protagonists fight and fall out before the climax of the movie cliches that the folks at CinemaSins are very fond of pointing out. Now, Rocketman also made some changes, obviously, but unlike Bohemian Rhapsody, most of Rocketman's changes actually serve a purpose. In Rocketman, a group therapy session in a rehab facility serves as a framing device for the story. The film follows Elton John's career up until the 80s, but in reality he didn't go to rehab until 1990. Now, it's obvious to most people that he didn't actually attend rehab in that fabulous Orange Devil outfit, but beyond that, a lot of the rehab part of the movie is fictionalized. Now, this change actually serves a purpose by giving the story a framing device. Although, I'm not entirely sure why they changed the timeline, but whatever. But hey, at least it's not something pulled out of the music biopic chapter of the Book of Clichés. Okay, now here's something the movie got half right and half wrong.
The name Elton stemmed from his bluesology bandmate Elton Dean. According to Rocketman, however, the name John popped into Reggie's head when he saw a photograph of the Beatles. As funny as that is, it's also 100% wrong. Reginald actually got his new last name from another bluesology member, Long John Baldry.
Probably the biggest historical inaccuracy in Rocketman is just how fast and loose it plays with the timeline of when some of his songs came out. In the movie, he plays Crocodile Rock at the Troubadour in 1970.
I remember when rock was young.
In reality, that song came out in 1972. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting and Border Song also appeared before they were released in real life. And finally, I'm Still Standing marks Elton John's comeback and the start of his sobriety, but in reality he was still very much on drugs when the song came out in 1983.
But I never could have hoped to win. You're sliding down the road and leading me again. The threats you made were meant to cut me down. And if my love was just a circus, you'd be a clown by now.
Now, I can forgive all that because it actually serves a legitimate purpose. You see, Rocketman is a jukebox musical.
Hey kids, shake it loose together. The spotlight's helping someone that's been known to change the weather. But kill the fathead cow tonight, so stick around.
Now, in a jukebox musical, the music needs to drive the story forward thematically and express what the characters are experiencing, so this change actually makes sense. Now, one more thing I should probably point out is that in real life, Elton John once came out as bisexual 12 years before he came out as gay. The movie does not include this, but it also doesn't add anything fake in its place, so I really don't mind. Now, with all that being said, there are plenty of things both of these movies got right. Elton John's relationship with Bernie Taupin, Freddie Mercury's relationship with Mary Austin, Elton John being married to Renate Blauwel. I really hope I pronounced that right. Elton John having a difficult childhood and his biggest parental figure being his grandmother. Freddie Mercury crediting his extra teeth for his unique voice.
I was born with 4 additional incisors. Let's face it, my mouth means more range.
Elton John trying to kill himself by taking a shitload of Valium and falling into his pool a short time before his Dodger Stadium concert.
For my next trick! I'm gonna fucking kill myself.
Yeah, that actually happened. Bohemian Rhapsody's 6-minute length being considered way too long.
It's expensive, and as for Bohemian
Rhapsody.
What is that?
It's an epic poem.
It goes on forever, 6 bloody minutes.
Pity your wife if you think 6 minutes is forever.
Elton John being in a band called Bluesology. Elton John being a child prodigy who could play a song after hearing it once. Time for a quick history lesson because this is my show and I can do what I want. The PG-13 rating was created in 1984 after parents were upset about all the dark shit going on in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Later that same year, Red Dawn was the first movie ever released with a PG-13 rating, and it's actually really good. I completely understand why the PG-13 rating exists. There are a couple scenes in Temple of Doom that scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. That being said, there are some stories that need an R rating to be told properly and suffer without it. Deadpool, RoboCop, Terminator, and Conan come to mind. Rocketman is one of those stories. Bohemian Rhapsody is another. Both of these movies portray the lives of famous LGBT singers who did a lot of drugs. The difference is that one of these movies actually explored these interesting and controversial topics, and the other basically just hinted at them. I know the surviving members of Queen fought to have the movie be PG-13. I get that they wanted the movie to be more family-friendly, but like the examples I mentioned earlier, all this did was make the movie worse. Freddie Mercury was a bisexual man who did all kinds of drugs, and we barely see any of that in Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, I might be forgetting something, but from what I can remember, we get one scene where he kisses another man, and another scene where we see him follow a dude into a bathroom. That's about it. As for the drugs, we see him drinking here and there, but beyond that, there is very little drug use. Like, from anyone. This is exactly why trying to make the movie family-friendly only served to make it less interesting. Rocketman, on the other hand, actually explores Elton John's sexuality and extensive drug use. In the opening scene, he says, and I quote, "My name is Elton Hercules John, and I'm an alcoholic, and a cocaine addict, and a sex addict, and a bulimic. I'm also a shopaholic who has problems with weed, prescription drugs, and anger management." Throughout the movie, we see him drinking, snorting coke, taking pills, and suffering the consequences. And besides the drugs, this is apparently the first major studio movie to have a gay sex scene. I am completely straight, and I applaud this movie for having the balls to include that scene. Now, I have one last thing I want to talk about before I wrap this up. This is more just something that bugs me personally, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. Rocketman tells the story of Sir Elton John, a man who spent most of his career as a solo act with another dude writing his songs, and the movie portrays this spot on. Bohemian Rhapsody, on the other hand, tells the story of Freddie Mercury, a man who spent most, if not all, of his career as a member of the same band. And yet, it's mostly about him, and the band is basically just there in the background. Now, this isn't necessarily a flaw in the movie, but it's just something that's kind of come to bug me, so I should probably explain why. According to my vaguely scientific research, roughly 70% of music biopics have one of two titles: the name or nickname of the musician or band, or the name of one of their songs or albums. And yes, obviously there are exceptions to this. Now, when a music biopic uses a title like The Buddy Holly Story, or Ray, or Sid and Nancy, it tells you who the story is about. Now, when it uses the name of the band, it pretty much always means that the movie is going to be about the band, even if one of the members is a more prominent character than the rest. When it uses the name of a song, and that song is associated with a band, it implies the same thing. When I first heard about Bohemian Rhapsody, before the trailer dropped, I was pretty excited because to my knowledge there had never been a Queen biopic. Unfortunately, there still hasn't been one. Now, to be fair, the trailers for Bohemian Rhapsody made it clear that the movie was about Freddie Mercury, and the posters say the only thing more extraordinary than their music is his story. I can't be the only one who was a little disappointed that it wasn't going to be about Queen as a group. All that being said, I went into the movie with one expectation in this regard, that it would flesh out and develop the other members of Queen just enough to make them feel like real people, if not more. And the movie failed to meet this very low bar. Not only are the other band members basically not fleshed out at all, there are really only 2 scenes where we get anything resembling development with them. I freely admit that I might be forgetting something. The I Love My Car scene...
I put my heart and soul into this song.
No one is disputing that.
And you don't like it because you want your songs on the album.
It's not that, Roger.
And what is it?
I'm in love with my car. Maybe it's not strong enough?
And the scene where Brian Mays comes up with the idea for We Will Rock You.
I want to give the audience a song that they can perform, right? Let them be part of the band. So what can they do?
Now, to the film's credit, the other band members look their parts extremely well. But beyond those 2 scenes, none of them have much personality to them. Instead of feeling like real people, they just feel like glorified plot devices. I went into this movie knowing very little about Freddie Mercury and virtually nothing about the rest of Queen. When I came out of the movie, I knew quite a bit about Freddie, but all I knew about the others was that the guy named Brian came up with the idea for We Will Rock You. I am not saying that the filmmakers should have fleshed out Brian Mays, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon to the same extent they did with Freddie. But when I was writing this thing, I had to stop typing and look up Queen on Wikipedia because, again, all I knew about the other 3 band members was that the guy named Brian came up with the idea for We Will Rock You. From what I can tell, they all have fairly interesting stories, and the least the filmmakers could have done is given us a taste of each of those stories, or at least their personalities, but for the most part they didn't even try. This is starting to turn into a rant, so I should probably explain where I'm coming from here. Remember the Runaways? No, not those Runaways. Yeah, those Runaways. Well, I don't, because I was 12 when that movie came out, but I've seen it now, and it is hands down the most underrated biopic I have ever seen. It starred Dakota Fanning during one of the high points in her career.
Are you kidding?
Kristen Stewart actually getting to stretch her acting muscles in between having to play a block of wood Mary Sue in Twilight.
Fuck you, old man. Hey, what's your fucking problem, man? What's your fucking problem, man? Hey, I wouldn't. It's a lose-lose situation.
How's that?
Well, if you win, you beat up a girl. If you lose, you get beat up by 2. Teenage ones.
And Michael Shannon at his most fabulous and flamboyant.
We are choosing you to be a part of rock and roll history. Do you want to be in the band?
It also had Tatum O'Neal as Dakota Fanning's mother, so that's cool. Now, it bombed at the box office, but it is nice to see that it's gained a strong following since then. Anyway, The Runaways is about the formation of the titular band, but it mainly focuses on Cherie Currie, played by Dakota Fanning, Joan Jett, played by Kristen Stewart, and their relationships with each other and with Kim Fowley, played by Michael Shannon.
Joan Jett, that's a cool name. You guys got a demo?
Now, these 3 are the main characters, but the film still gives the other band members some actual character and personality. Stella Maeve and Scout Taylor Compton play Sandy West and Lita Ford respectively, and even though they don't get a ton of screen time, they make their characters feel like real people because they were given the opportunity to do so. Aaliyah Shawkat is also there, but she's actually playing a fictional character because the Runaways' real bassist Jackie Fox chose not to release her rights, so whatever. Oh, and like Rocketman, the Runaways is rated R, and it does not shy away from the band's drug use, especially Cherie Currie. Now, it does keep a relationship with Joan mostly implied, but I'm pretty sure that's because Joan and Cherie were both underage during the events of this film. Now, Kristen Stewart was 19 during filming, but Dakota Fanning was actually 15 at the time, so yeah, it was definitely the right choice to keep most of it implied. Now, the film does explore some aspects of the girl's sexuality.
Try using the shower head. Now, think about someone you have a crush on. Still not working. How about Farrah Fawcett? You like her?
Yeah, who doesn't? Oh. Wait, I think I feel something. Oh, shit.
But they keep it subtle for the most part. Now, If the people who made Bohemian Rhapsody had tried to develop Freddie Mercury's bandmates but simply failed, that would have been easier to forgive, but from what I can tell, they barely even tried. And yeah, I know most people don't really mind, and that's fine, but I do. So, in conclusion, Bohemian Rhapsody is a potentially fascinating story that was neutered and sterilized by a PG-13 rating in a misguided attempt to make the story family-friendly. Rocketman is a potentially fascinating story that was actually allowed to be told properly. And The Runaways is criminally underrated, and you should go watch it right now. That's all for today. Toodles.